My name is Deanna German, creative director at Koto.
Why do you think they chose Koto?
You jump on a Zoom call and there's 50 squares and you're like, wow, who is everyone?
You feel like exposed.
They were wanting to run an open design process.
This type of a process definitely takes courage.
Having to share our work iteratively.
Ask 100 people, you'll get 100 opinions.
Which was refreshing, but also really scary.
Couldn't it water things down to like appease everyone?
There was naturally a slight nervousness.
Yeah, tell us more about that.
I would say,
I want to know for you, are you personally, are you like an online reviewer? Like, have you ever left a Yelp review or a Google review, anything like that?
honestly, Blake, I wish that I could say I have. I'm the type of person that enjoys reading reviews more than actually putting pen to paper and writing them myself. But I do like the reviews I do leave on Airbnb, TripAdvisor, etc. I do on a more frequent basis, I'd say, but less of a Yelper or a Reddit writer, I would say.
Yeah, I do feel like there's two types of people in this world. There are those that leave reviews, and it's like their thing, and then those of us who just read reviews. Like
100%. I'm definitely one of those people that just like loves researching things and getting thoughts, and I'll read Amazon reviews like 100%, but I won't necessarily leave them.
Yeah, I have to be really upset. Actually, recently I left a 1-star review on Google because
Okay.
I had a landscaping project at my house and it just didn't go well, and the group kind of ghosted me and didn't come back. So I blasted them on Google, and you know what? They called me. And they finally returned my call. And then they responded to the Google review and blamed me in the Google review. And I couldn't believe it.
What?
They tried to frame it as like, well, you should have called us. You never told us. We'll take care of this right away. And they totally saved face on Google. And then you can't respond back to their response on Google reviews. And they never fixed the problem. So yeah, that was like my one and only time leaving a Google review.
That's so disappointing, because you do hear of people like I've heard of people that have left comments on social channels like Twitter, Instagram, etc. And a lot of their complaints will be resolved immediately because people just don't want that bad PR or traction. So maybe you could try that, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. I guess sometimes it pays to speak up, Maybe that's the lesson.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about Glassdoor. When was the first time the idea of working with Glassdoor emerged? Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm. I do. So we received an email from one of the Glassdoor project managers on the brand team about a rebrand initiative that the team was wanting to undertake. And they were just doing a reach out to see if we were interested in meeting with them to discuss the opportunity further. And I think for all of us, when we got that email, we were like, wow, this would be such an incredible opportunity, especially, Glassdoor is the world's largest, I would say, job search and insights platform. It's a household name. So we were all super excited. I think we responded with a hell yeah, or something close to that at least, just to show our enthusiasm. And yeah, we jumped on a casual call with Tim Murray, who's the creative director at Glassdoor. Did an initial meet and greet. He walked us through the future product and brand vision, and it was just a great conversation, like all things. And it starts with a conversation, right? And he is literally one of the nicest people alive. He's so humble and really kind of just a great person to be around. So we left feeling, I guess, really excited about where the product was going and the future vision and how brand could play a role in helping to shape that. So from there, we were sent an RFP to respond to.
Were you familiar with Glassdoor or a Glassdoor user before that?
I was very familiar with it. I had used it in the past to check on salaries and average, average salaries for industries, job opportunities, etc. So very familiar with it. I did sign up for it immediately after having that conversation with Tim. So really ensuring that we were fully immersing ourselves in the Glassdoor experience. We at Koto don't have a page. It's something that we've talked about doing. And I think, who knows, hopefully we will in the future. But yeah, was super familiar with it. Everyone here knew of it. I think it's one of those brands that does pop up. It's industry agnostic. I feel like a lot of people just know it or have encountered it at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, I remember the first time I found out that our company had a Glassdoor page, and I didn't really know what Glassdoor was. And I went to it,
Yeah,
and, you know, you feel a little bit like, oh, who's been reporting on us? You feel like exposed a little bit. So the level of transparency it brought to the market has been pretty profound. And I personally love just like the balance that it has, like if you want to be a good leader, if you want to have a great culture and team, like there's some accountability there that you can't necessarily hide like you could pre Glassdoor.
100%. Most definitely. I think what's great about the platform itself as well is that you don't have to reveal who you fully are either. You can choose. So if you want to leave a post and leave your job title or leave your company name,
Right.
there's still that level of, like you said, transparency where I think people feel comfortable in communicating the honest truth about places. And it was really interesting, and I'll get into this later, but just reading through the reviews themselves, and you knew the companies that people were talking about, and you're like, okay, I may have had a similar experience there. So,
Hmm.
it's coming from a real place of truth and honesty, which is always super refreshing.
Yeah. So you had the RFP, you responded to
Yes.
it, and then they invited you into some sort of a pitch. I would assume. Tell us a little bit more about
Yes.
that, and then why do you think they chose Koto?
Of course. So the pitch process itself was really smooth. So after our initial chat with Tim, we were asked to respond to a questionnaire just to vet some of the questions. And then we pulled together an RFP that really aimed to answer a set of the key criteria that they were looking for in their brief. So their brief was super juicy. I think it was about a 30-page document going through kind of why now, why is the new Glassdoor changing? And what we did was really kind of unpack where they were wanting to go and how we could validate that through some interesting case studies of previous work that we had done. So a lot of that was in response to, our expertise in building creative strategy, a demonstration of a real challenger mindset, a willingness to kind of want to shake things up a little bit and do something a bit disruptive, our willingness and ability to collaborate with internal teams as well. And I think a lot of that sat with, the product team as well, and how we've collaborated with product teams in the past. Glassdoor is essentially a product at the end of the day. So we need to demonstrate our ability and expertise in building brands from the product out. And also our openness to transparency throughout the process. One of Glassdoor's core values is radical transparency, and they were wanting to run an open design process where we would be, having to share our work iteratively throughout the process to both internal and external teams. So they wanted to gauge our appetite for doing so. And for us, we had done that previously in the past on another project. So it was something we were familiar with. And so we collated this presentation in response to this key criteria, validated it with some project examples, and jumped on a Zoom call. I wish we could have done it in person, but we live in the days of Zoom. And we met with the entire brand team, which was refreshing, but also really scary. When you jump on a Zoom call and there's 50 squares and you're like, wow, who is everyone? Can I speak to everyone on this call? It was that kind of a feeling. And the C-suite were there as well. And yeah, we just walked them through our case studies, our thinking, our approach, some initial thoughts on how we could start to think about the new Glassdoor refresh as well. And yeah, we ultimately just had an incredible conversation. Everyone was really engaged. The product team asked a lot of questions alongside the brand team. And yeah, the rest is history. I think we just left feeling really excited. And I think it's always great when you do meet with the client and you just have that instant connection. And I think that understanding of, where we're heading, and it's a real kind of collaborative effort. It felt very much like that. So we left feeling really positive and really excited about working with their team.
That's awesome. I love that. Yeah, I feel like those big pitch meetings when there's 50 people on the other side. I mean, that is high pressure and stressful. But B, I always feel like they are a little bit like what taking exams in college felt like, where if I went into it and like the exam went okay, I left thinking like, well, that was okay. I probably got like a C or a D. But if I leave the exam being like, oh my goodness, that was amazing, like I crushed it, then I probably got an A. So sometimes you have that like gut reaction to like how the chemistry is going. And it sounds like you're like, we aced this with like this. It was just like, lots of connection all around.
1,000%. It was definitely that feeling of, yeah, this is great. Like we felt like we'd won it in a way, which I think you were alluding to in terms of that
Yeah.
feeling after leaving a great meeting. But we didn't want to, what's the word? Have kind of false expectations at the same time. So we're like, that went
Yeah.
amazing. It would be an awesome job to have. Let's see what happens. And
Yeah.
we didn't hear back from them for 2 weeks. So we weren't sure. And we knew they were meeting with a few different people. We had some ideas of who they may have been meeting with. But yeah, we heard from Tim 2 weeks later, and we basically started working immediately, which was incredible.
I love that. I want to talk more about the feedback and the transparency in the creative process, because I feel like that's
Yep.
one of the most interesting parts of this whole project. So at this point in the story, you had experience running a feedback process similar to what they wanted. Right. But in general, do you have concerns about that type of a format for getting feedback? Like, couldn't it really derail the creative process and the timeline and water things down to like appease everyone? Like, were there any concerns about that model?
I think there was naturally a slight nervousness. I think especially the way in which we were running the creative shares, it was very much iterative. So usually when we've done similar projects in the past, you'd be sharing, I would say, a much more resolved creative concept to the community. And this was very much, we started sharing after round one. And round one, thoughts are not fully baked yet. Everything's still very whippy. There's the elements that we really want to lean into and craft. But I would say that what was incredible about the open design process was that the community was a part of the rebrand initiative from the get-go. And that was both internal audiences at Glassdoor and external audiences as well. And I think what it did do was very much validate the direction that we ended up taking in terms of, does this feel right for Glassdoor? Does this effectively communicate a workplace for conversation and where the product was going? And that became apparent after the initial round one share. There was a lot of love for the road in which we took, ultimately. But there was also a lot of criticism, which comes from, sharing your work publicly. And there was some really, I would say, interesting reactions to that first round share, even though there was lots of love for where we were going with the direction we ultimately took. There was criticism around, the heavy use of black and white, that the color palette looked like Google, that the word mark looked like the masthead of Cosmopolitan magazine, which I hadn't heard in years. And there was also this eagerness and this desire to put the community even more front and center. So they almost wanted this, illustration style or art direction style that really celebrated the community more. So these pushes for us really helped to refine some of that system thinking, but it ultimately didn't change the core DNA of the direction itself. And I think that's what we were looking for buy-in from. I think everyone has an opinion about something. And it was like, okay, what do we filter through? What do we take on and actually evolve? And what can we mitigate through a really strong brand story that will, surpass some of these initial reactions to some of the elements of the system?
Yeah, that's really good. I love that. All right, so let's jump back a little bit in the story. And you've won the project. You got started immediately, and you're working with Tim and then the brand team. Is that right? Was there like more to the story in terms of who you were working with? Was there another like close point of contact in addition to Tim?
Yeah, so our two main stakeholders on Glassdoor side were Tim, creative director, and Eric Breyer, who was head of product as well. So we worked really closely with those two specifically, ensuring that everything we were building was through both a product and a brand lens. So one of the biggest obstacles with the existing brand itself was that it didn't stand up or hold up strong in products in terms of color palettes, in terms of the verticality of the symbol itself. So this was something that we wanted to ensure from the get-go. We were really thinking with a product-first perspective that could equally give the brand team what they needed as well to be able to flex the system across all of the different channels in which they needed to. So there were our two main points of contact, and we had weekly catch-ups with both of them, in addition to some broader syncs with the broader design team. But they really kind of, I think, kept the thinking and the work on track and were our biggest allies internally as well for championing the work and really kind of ensuring that everyone was embracing it and excited about it.
Great. Okay. And so let's see. You talked a little bit about what was wrong with their previous logo, which is great. Maybe walk us through the upfront immersion process and how you did research and then eventually uncovered this positioning idea, and then tell us about that positioning idea.
Okay, yeah. So at the beginning of every project that we do at Koto, we undertake a immersion process. So part of this process is fully immersing ourselves in the product itself. So signing up as Glassdoor users, and also interviewing key members of the stakeholder team. So we were fortunate enough to have interviews with everyone in the C-suite, as well as the direct design team that we were working with. And I think some of the biggest challenges that were coming up with the existing brand were, one was that it was really hard to use, and it lacked almost a sense of distinction and ownability within the space in which it operated. So the verticality of their door symbol was really challenging to use. So people just started to forgo it and just use the word mark. People were starting to make their kind of own rules within the system itself. They had a color palette that looked great in terms of marketing, but was very CMYK in its appearance. And that was really challenging for the product design team. They were like, we have one shade of green. How can we flex this across all the different touch points of the brand itself? And they were relying on, I would say, a very old icon library and stock photography and illustration that started to position them in the world of LinkedIn. Like, they just didn't really have any distinguishable or ownable assets as part of their brand toolkit. Another problem that we were really wanting to solve as well was a product pivot as well. So Glassdoor were wanting to shift away from just being a platform for insights into a community for real workplace conversation. And part of this move was their acquisition of Fishbowl, which is a social app, almost like, I was trying to think of the best way to describe this, a cross between Reddit and LinkedIn, where you can leave these similarly reviews in bowls, as they call them, and there's different industry bowls, and they're anonymous, but it's a lot more conversational and more of a social like dialogue that happens. So it's a little bit more back and forth than Glassdoor, where you leave a review and that's it. This is more encouraging you to talk with people within your industries and ask some questions about things. So they had that going on as well. So they really needed to change the perception of the brand, knowing where the product was heading. So there was that part. Have I gone off track, Blake? I just want to make sure.
No, you're good. Yeah, I think I love all that. I mean, I love Koto's immersion process and the research, and I also fanboy a little bit on like the creative strategy positioning approach, because positioning. I'll get into that. Yeah, so positioning is like, some people make it really technical, and it's like, Glassdoor is the software brand that blah 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 totally. Solution integrated outcomes, and it's like more technical. But I love the way that Koto brings poetry and memorability to little short pithy phrases that drives everything forward. Yeah. So tell us more about how you got to that idea.
I've got a really good anecdote for that as well. So as part of our immersion process and in interviewing all of the key stakeholders, there was a story that was revealed to us, and it was actually the foundational story for how Glassdoor, the company, started. So the company itself started where employee salaries were left and found on a copier machine. And there was this decision that was made around, people should have visibility over, what people are earning, because there are, discrepancies within the industry, etc. And this story really became the catalyst for inspiring the positioning of real work talk. So we took this idea of, transparency, and really started to fuse it with this idea of conversation and Glassdoor as being the platform where people can have these real and honest conversations about work. So the story of where we took the brand very much came from that foundational story. And the idea of real work talk, we threw around a few different iterations of how that came together. There was a push for, is it real transparent talk, or is it real talk, or is it like, how do we articulate it in a way that feels really honest and authentic to the user base? And this just felt really true and really honest. And we wanted to ensure that this idea permeated every element of the brand system itself. So starting with the logo itself, we wanted the new symbol to really reflect this idea of real work talk. And we iterated a lot, we tried a bunch of things, and we kept coming back to, how do we represent conversation? What's the most simplest way to represent a conversation? And which led us to the quote marks themselves. And I think, you think about quote marks and you're like, okay, they're quote marks. And I think we wanted to push it a level, and we started messing around with it, flipping them around. And as soon as we flipped the first quote mark on itself and it became the G, it was like, oh, wow, this has to be it. Like this was that. It was one of those real aha moments where we were like, okay, we've got these two quote marks. The first flip becomes the G. The second is the D. It becomes this conversational monogram that's so authentic to the idea that we're trying to communicate. And we wanted to even dial that up another level and put the two quote marks at each end of the Glassdoor word mark. So literally placing Glassdoor itself at the center of workplace conversation as this kind of new catalyst for embracing this new way of, thinking about work, having conversations around work. And this also really inspired the tone of voice. I'm a massive tone of voice advocate, and the power of that in transforming how a brand connects with people. And for us, we really lent into it. We got in, we were reading up on reviews. We actually surfaced some of the real quotes and conversations that were happening on the platform itself, on both Glassdoor and Fishbowl, elevating insights, elevating really kind of honest truths, fun quotes, and really bringing the community to the forefront of the brand. So we really wanted to amplify those real conversations. And then going back to the copier story for a minute, we're like, wait a minute, we can't lose that as part of the brand story. It's such an integral part of the foundation for Glassdoor itself. We really use the copier mechanic to inspire the visual and verbal brand itself as well. So we built a brand system around a primary black and white palette with a secondary palette that was inspired by office copier papers as well. So we really wanted that authentic link back to the origin story. And we also developed an illustration style that had this slightly grainy black and white copy-like texture to it, and use that as a mechanic to bring the community to life in a really fun and inclusive way. So we really wanted to ensure that visually the brand really responded and represented the origin story, and that tonally and from a logo perspective, a tone of voice perspective, and even emotion perspective, that we were really capturing the core sentiment of real work talk.
So the real work talk, was it presented as like a standalone idea and then you got into design routes? Or was it like, here is real work? We think the essence of Glassdoor is this concept of real work talk, and we're going to bring that to life with these quotation marks, and then you sort of show the visual implementation of that concept. How did you present the positioning idea? Was it separate than creative, or was it like with the creative?
It's a really great question. And with Glassdoor, they already had, I would say, a very robust strategic framework in place when we first started. Okay. And post the initial immersion interviews, we were circling around a few different thoughts and ideas for this positioning statement and this creative jumping off point for brands. I would say we landed on a few ideas that were close to Real Work Talk. However, it wasn't until we actually got to the creative and putting pen to paper and iterating on some of the key themes that we really wanted to bring to life, so that being community, transparency, and conversation, that we really landed on Real Work Talk as the idea. So it was, funnily enough, the root name that we presented to them versus like going in with this is the positioning. So we had the mission and vision as the linchpins for where we were going. And within that, we were flexing slightly differently into those core attributes of the product expression. So do you want me to dive into that?
Yeah, tell us more about that. What do you were there attributes that were part of what they sort of brought to the table from their like strategic work?
100%. So for the initial round one share, we presented back to them 3 concepts, and each of them lent into slightly different aspects of the product expression and experience. And what we really wanted to capture was where the product was heading. So not being too rooted in where it is today, but how we could start to move towards that positioning of Glassdoor being more than just an insight platform and this real community place for conversation. So the first direction that we shared with them very much elevated the community and almost took on this slightly more social lens and perspective. We lent a lot more into digital and avatars and bringing more of that social aspect to Glassdoor. And I think while we loved it, we also felt like this is going to be a really big stretch. Like product is going to have to really level up in order to land this brand system and this idea. The second direction we presented them with was really celebrating this idea around work-life and the fusion of those two worlds coming together. It was very, I would say, editorial and elevated, which was something that they really wanted to see, and were pushing us to show them something that felt more aspirational within the space of work itself. And the third approach, which is where we landed with Real Work Talk, really just stripped everything back. We were like, okay, we're about transparency, authenticity, conversation. What is the most distilled way of communicating and representing this in a way that feels authentic to the current Glassdoor experience as well? So this is where we really elevated bold insights, quotes, conversations, and took a more, I would say, slightly more authoritative position than a secondary position. We were like, this is going to be the bold one that pushes them outside of their comfort zone a little bit. Like, we're going to make them a bit uncomfortable, but we were like, it makes so much sense for the brand. And I think us having this really strong and singular, compelling story really got everyone on board. And it was one of those meetings where unanimously everyone in the room was like, oh shit, it's route 3. Like, there's no question. Like, this is so us, but it also shows us where we can push the brand in the future. Like, we'd still consider that as part of the system. And they were like, yeah, we're at the end of the day, like, we want to be this platform for community and conversation, and Real Work Talk, like this really bold and confident approach, really gives us a positioning. It shakes things up a little bit, and it gives us a leg to stand on and to continue to build our brand and product around as well.
Going into it, was that the route that was your favorite? Like, did you have a little favoritism towards that direction?
Like, I like to think that I don't have favorites, but it's really funny.
But you do. We all do.
I know.
We all have favorites. Like, even if it's little, you try to go in open-handed. Like, I'm cool. I'm cool if they choose either direction. They're all great, but you're like secretly, but I really subjectively like this one for X, Y, and Z reason.
I would say I was maybe slightly biased towards it, as I'd worked on the symbol itself and the core system. But I think it was one of those ones where unanimously, like, the team were like, this just makes sense. Like, this is the one that feels right. And I think it's not every day that a logo or a symbol falls in your lap. It's just so simple and has a little twist to it and just feels right and effectively communicates what you're trying to communicate in a new way. And it was one of those. So was definitely enthusiastic about presenting the work. And I think that did come across, but the story and the thinking really, really helped us sell that direction in and really kind of get everyone's buy-in and their excitement around, it was really interesting on the call. The product team were already thinking about, oh, wow, we can take these data and statistics and this is how we can start thinking about it in the product. And it already had this momentum around it from the very beginning that was really great to see. Sometimes you jump on these calls and these big presentations and you're almost met with a no expressiveness, no response. Like people are just like seeing creative for the first time in a lot of instances and don't know how to respond. So we were really fortunate that we had a lot of the brand team there and they were already thinking about where they could start to take the system just off the base of what we just presented, which was really inspiring to see and really great for us as being, custodians of the brand to date and having crafted it and sat with it for 2 weeks to be like, oh yeah, like this has legs. This is going places.
So everyone fell in love with the third route and the quotations, but then you still had the layer of, well, we need to post this in the community on Fishbowl and to get feedback. How did you feel at that point? Were you like, yeah, open-handed, let's just see what the feedback is? Or were you like, oh no, what if the feedback from the community really squashes number 3?
I think, as I mentioned earlier, there's always a nervousness around putting your work out there for public critique and finding that balance of, how much of this feedback is really going to derail where we're going. Is it going to validate where we're going? Is it going to push us into a slightly different space? And yeah, I'm not going to lie, we were a little bit nervous about sharing. And I think the way in which we shared the work as well was very curated in the sense that we didn't want to overwhelm people. So it was very much a pithy write-up of this is the brand idea and this is the expression of, on almost like a bento board, as we like to call them now. So it wasn't kind of taking them on, I would say, like the full journey. It was showing them a peek into it. So there was a slight nervousness, like, what if something gets lost in translation? What if people just have a innate personal reaction to the work and don't understand like where the brand is going and how this is all going to connect back to that? So we were a little bit nervous, but at the same time, I think coming off the back of that first round presentation, we had the confidence of the team and that they felt like this was the right direction for the brand, that we were quietly confident that the community would feel the same. And they did, luckily enough. But there were, I would say, pushes along the way that we really wanted to address to ensure that, they did feel heard without losing the strength of the core system that we'd started to lay the foundations of as well.
Yeah. Are there some examples and you might not remember some of those details, that's fine, but I'm curious, like, what did you adjust based on some of the community feedback?
Definitely. So I would say the two main elements that we had another pass at, and this was also something that the core brand team at Glassdoor wanted us to revise. The first was the color palette. So we were really pushing for this really strong black and white aesthetic. Once again, linking back to the origin story of Glassdoor being found on a copier machine. And we saw the strength in just owning black and white in the space and having a really punchy, bold secondary palette that incorporated Glassdoor green amongst some other really primary tones that were inspired by copier paper. But the community had a really strong reaction to it. I think we underestimated, I would say, the love of the green itself, the existing color. And we weren't wanting to get rid of it entirely. We were wanting to, reserve it for key brand moments within products. But we didn't want to have it as the hero color. And this was something that the community had a reaction to. And I think the combination of the primary tones that we were using felt to them like it was, Google or it was another kind of brand. And I think trying to find ownership within the color space is incredibly challenging, but we did want to really lean into that. And we also spoke and worked quite closely with the product team around, okay, guys, what do you need? How are we going to build the best product experience? So that made us go back to actually some of the colors we presented as part of the Route 1 direction, which the community also loved. They loved the vibrancy and energy of that palette. So we started to fuse those two palettes together and do a lot of iterations and tests. And as part of our round 2 share, we presented a new palette for that direction, which a lot of people were like, wow, that's totally shifted how this feels now. It feels so much warmer. And we were still hoping that we could keep the black and white thing going, but that also changed once we presented the work to the CEO. So that was one component. And the second was illustration. So in round 1, as I mentioned earlier, we had a like black and white copier kind of loose, sketchy style to illustration that we thought just felt really honest and raw and real. And we had it in very small applications throughout the system. We kind of didn't want to lean into it too much. We really wanted the community's voice to be front and center versus an illustration style. But I think one of the comments that was made was, does this start to feel a bit too cold? We had an uppercase typographic treatment for the way in which we're treating the written word as well. And I think that combined with the uppercase word mark was quite, I think some people found it a bit aggressive and less warm and welcoming. So that made us kind of go back and re-look at the secondary typeface we were using, looking at a slightly more conversational, less shouty approach to how we were typesetting things, and equally leaning into, okay, the community wants to see more illustration, like they want it to feel more welcoming and a slightly more inviting. How can we elevate that a little bit as well? And so that made us go back again and start to really think about, through the lens of community, conversation, anonymity, how could we start to capture the community and represent the community in an interesting way and elevate that through a more visual lens versus a verbal lens.
And you mentioned this a minute ago, but I'd love to. All right, let me check in on the process, make sure I can recap where we are. You have gone down the design, initial design route, landed on a direction that you and the group you're working with at Glassdoor liked, did some of the Fishbowl testing, got some feedback, but in general, that direction had some good response. You tweaked a couple things like color, and you were starting to evolve illustration, and then it's probably, going from maybe like big sort of wide conceptual design direction, and you're tightening it up as you go. But then at some point you have to get the CEO on board to give a thumbs up and say, yes, let's go. But this was a pretty different approach, especially for a SaaS brand. And I know too well how some folks, especially in a B2B scenario, will discount personality. They'll discount, a non-traditional approach to brand. So this had to be a little bit of a, unique direction for the CEO to approve. Was that a difficult sell to get them on board?
In short, yes. So I think, like any big rebrand, there'll always be creative challenges along the way. And I think there's always a nervousness to depart from the known to the unknown. And I think within that, there's a lot of assumptions around, or fear around how the community will react to such a change. And I would say we weren't the ones directly presenting the work to the CEO either. So this was something that the C-suite team did on our behalf. And I don't think it was until we got to round 2, round 3 that the work was actually shared. So the working team really wanted to ensure that we got the brand to a place where it was working. Everyone felt really confident and comfortable with the systems thinking. So once the work was shared, we were just crossing our fingers and like, okay, hopefully this goes through. And like we expected, there were a few, I would say, pushbacks and a few things that Christian, the CEO, had some slight nervousness around. And the first was the use of black in the symbol and word mark. And this had already come up in some of the initial shares through Fishbowl or Glassdoor that we had done. And there was a real, I would say, nervousness around shifting away from the green. Glassdoor, since it started, has always been a green brand. So removing it from the primary logo was one of those things where following that presentation, we were like, okay, we're going to need to rethink this. We're going to need to relook at how we elevate that within the system. And the second was the use of the uppercase typography for the word mark. In the SaaS world, as I'm sure we know, lots of brands take on that lowercase, friendly, slightly more welcoming, I would say, tone in terms of their verbal logo lockups. And we really wanted to go in with this slightly more authoritative uppercase treatment that for us as designers, you know, we're like, oh, the proportions are based on the door frame. It's got that verticality. Like, we've softened the edges, like they're slightly round, they're not as sharp. But as you mentioned, presenting that to someone that doesn't have that eye and that precision for detail, they're just going to have an adverse reaction to it. So I think the uppercase combined with the black was something that, he wasn't comfortable with. And we, off the back of receiving this feedback from the team, we were like, okay, what can we do? How can we rethink this? And maybe just share a little bit more around our thought processes and benchmark it alongside brands within different categories and sectors that do have an uppercase treatment but don't feel too shouty, like Netflix, for example, or IKEA. Like, they're still for the people, but they don't come across as aggressive. Like, there's other components within the system that makes them feel, you know, warm and inviting, but they have a presence about them. So we built, I would say, a very detailed Google Slides deck. We tried to annotate this as much as possible, include as much thinking as much as possible, and these global benchmarks. And the team represented this back to Christian, and the persistence paid off in some ways. So we got buy-in on the word mark treatment being in uppercase. However, we didn't win the battle on the use of black and white. So we went back and we revised that, and we created a new shade of green for the primary word mark itself, and went back and worked through some applications such as the app tile, the product homepage, and just really showing how, you know, that changing green does give the brand a lot more prominence, and it still works within the system. It wasn't one of those it's going to ruin everything moments. But I think it is an interesting experience where, and I think that's one of the things that we're always trying to encourage within the stakeholder teams, that we always want to get this work in front of the key decision makers sooner rather than later, and have them as part of the journey and part of the conversation to mitigate anything like this happening towards the tail end of a job. Because I think we were all like, okay, worst case scenario, this doesn't get approved. We're going to have to go back and rethink the word mark, how that's going to impact the brand system. And we're at that kind of sharper end of the process, I would say, where everything's feeling tight and consistent and has a really strong story and connective tissue. So I think we're always of the opinion to involve CEOs and key decision makers sooner rather than later. But fortunate for us, it didn't derail the final deliverable and the end of that process.
Yeah, getting buy-in, or just thinking about broader stakeholder, the fancy term, stakeholder management, is such a difficult part of projects like this, because on one hand, you could make a good case that the CEO of a global SaaS-based brand doesn't really need to be in the nitty-gritty details of the visual language or the verbal language. You know, they really should just sort of be briefed in and trust their team and say, like, let's go. So that's like one side of the argument. But then the other side is like, well, if you are going to have an opinion or a say and are going to need to be the sort of the stamp of approval, you should be involved, just so we're sort of lock in step, so we can get through the creative process together in unity and not have what I call last minute swoopers, you know, that come down and steal the joy out of the great momentum. So, but it's really hard to navigate which is going to be best for that client or for that organization, because everyone's dynamics are a little different. And some groups are like, yes, like, let's get the brand agency in here and work directly with the CEO. And others are like, well, let's just like, you know, like, let's put a little bit of a wall between, just to protect and, you know, make sure. And it's so hard to navigate those situations, you know? So it is interesting to hear in this scenario, at the last minute, it made some changes, but it could be much worse. It could have been like, I don't get the quotations at all, start over.
Exactly. I think we were incredibly fortunate that Christian saw the bigger vision. I think it was more so that nervousness around, will the community know it's us? Like, we're shifting so
Mm-hmm.
far away from the green and losing the door, and will people see our app tile and not recognize that it's Glassdoor? So 100% agree. And I think we've been in both situations where we've had the CEO involved from the beginning, and that has been challenging in terms of, their, I would say, understanding of design, and them having a slightly more, I'd say, personal reaction to the work versus, okay, this is through the lens of the brand. But equally, it has been really beneficial to have, CEO and key decision makers involved in those conversations, just for visibility and to ensure, like you said, that things stay on track and we don't get to a point where we have to start again, which is not a fun place to be.
No, not a fun place. What about the messaging or the verbal side for the Glassdoor brand? That part of this work often gets overlooked. So how did you all approach just thinking about the messaging and bringing the sort of the real work talk idea to life from a messaging perspective?
Yeah, so our goal for tone of voice in the brand system was going back to the product vision. So we really wanted to establish a safe space for people to have these honest conversations about work. And we really wanted to ensure that, people felt encouraged and confident to speak really openly and share their emotional truths, their frustrations, what they're looking for in their next career move. And we really saw Glassdoor as the place to do that. And part of where Work Talk gets real was wanting to deliver on that in every touch point. So going back to the conversations that were happening on the platform, we really wanted to adopt a less authoritative and more conversational, honest tone that were inspired by these real conversations. And within that, we looked at all of the new kind of subject categories that were going to be a part of the new product experience. So everything from, equal pay to diversity in the workplace, and to ensure that our tone could stretch across those different subject matter, and that we could start to elevate different voices and different content within the brand system. We also didn't want it to feel, I would say, too heavy at times as well. In the search for that kind of honesty, we didn't want it to feel, too grim or too much the kind of opposite way. And we wanted to add these lighthearted moments within the brand system that the client coined as squibs. So these almost like comical quotes that were there to support the content. And they were very much inspired by the conversations that you hear around the workplace, like those little snippets of conversations you hear while you're making coffee or by the water cooler. And we wanted to ensure that the tone still felt a bit fresh and humorous where appropriate, but equally was hitting on this real honesty and authenticity. And as part of the brand system, we really wanted to elevate tone. So there are lots of applications where we looked at just using the quote marks and key quotes from people on the platform and the logo as the key brand touch point. So devoid of illustration and all those other things, and really just heroing the voice. And yeah, it was really great to be a part of developing the tone and how that applied throughout the product experience, from like onboarding, which was really friendly and welcoming. We omitted a lot of punctuation as well, just to keep it feeling really conversational. And yeah, that was such a key, I would say, part of the brand expression itself, the tone, where we really went into the honest conversations that were happening and used that as a really solid foundation for us creating new content for the team as well.
Yes, I love it. Awesome. Were you tempted to have like really snarky versions of real work talk where it's like little gossip lines? It's like, did you see what Brenda's wearing?
Yeah.
Or, can you believe what Johnny said?
We definitely did. I think there's definitely some quotes in there. Like, we were honestly reading, I think, given the space that we're in, we were like, okay, it's happening at other studios. And we were going through like some of the reviews, and there were some comments where we were like, okay, that's very sharp, but we're like, let's just include it. So we'd go through and we'd, pinpoint. I think it was finding that balance between, the honest truth, and then, like you said, having some fun with how we could elevate, that office banter and that chat that I think is one of the joys of being part of the office experience and the workplace experience. Those really slightly gossipy but fun, authentic moments within a workday. So that's something that we tried to capture in illustration, but also I would say represented through the tonal lens as well.
And we didn't get into a lot of the nitty gritty on final color builds or like illustration style or even the beautiful custom type. But, and I think we'll cover a lot of that in the episode, like quick voiceover.
Okay, awesome.
But from your perspective, what were you most excited about with the final direction? Like if you could choose a few things to highlight, what was it that you felt like delivered on the positioning and delivered on the original problem the best?
Okay. I did have a note about this. Give me a second. Okay. I think for me, the most captivating part of the new brand system is that everything that we created really highlights this idea of real work talk. And I think there's a real power to owning a simple idea and flexing that across an entire brand system. So from the logo and the monogram right through to the tone of voice and the product expression itself. I think for me personally, if I had to pick one core element aside from the logo itself, it would be the data visualization system that we built for them. It really elevated their content. So Glassdoor had this incredible content, but no one was really engaging with it. It was quite lofty and quite text heavy. And I think one of the successes through the lens of the new rebrand is being able to elevate that content in a really bold way through graphs and data, but also illustrative storytelling. So bringing illustration and some of that kind of interesting quotes to the forefront of the brand. And this is an element that also can continue to evolve with the brand as it grows and become a really ownable and iconic asset of the system. So I would say, the visualization of data and really bringing that to the forefront of the brand in a confident way was one of the things that I think is really strong about the final brand system.
Cool. Yeah. That's not like the answer I would have expected. I mean, I think it's beautiful.
What were you
really
thinking?
Cool. Well, I don't know. Most creative directors, I feel like, would be like, oh, like the illustration styles are so expressive. And I mean, you're like, I really like how clean and beautiful the data visualization is. I think that's really cool. I think that's fun.
Thank you. Yeah, I think for me, it's like one of those things where, like, not to say illustrations are incredible, but I feel like they're one of those things that, they're a part of most brand toolkits. And I think for Glassdoor specifically, because it was so much about, obviously community voice and the insights and data, I think being able to elevate that in a way that still felt, dare I say it, sexy and engaging was really fun. And pairing that with the motion system that, spoke to the product expression was really fun. Like, our motion designer did such an incredible job in imbuing every piece of motion with something that related to the product. So we had almost like the paper treatment of things getting revealed. We had the typing a review and then going back and deleting it and then retyping it again, being really authentic to user behavior. And even looking at the more I think about it, motion was such a fun part as well. Looking at the revolving door and how we could bring that into the behavior of the word mark and some of the content cards. So that combination of motion bringing everything to life as well was really compelling. Now that I think of it as well as part of the final system.
Yeah, and I think the data visualization is also just a great example of how beautiful the color and type is together. Because that's really the building blocks of what's happening. Like really simple graphs, but then the type with the black applied to the different colors, that's also just a mark of other pieces of the VIS coming together and how well it functions together.
100%.
All right. So we have covered this a couple times already, but I am curious if there's anything else to add in terms of, you get to the end of the project and you're looking back, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on the value on the transparency approach and getting community feedback. Did it feel pretty significant, pretty important? You're happy you did it? Any other like just thoughts around that part of the story?
I would say having gotten to the end of the line and having the community involved throughout the duration of the project almost made the launch, I would say, a little less daunting in essence. It was something where we knew that the community had, had seen the development throughout the different stages, and we were confident that it was going to be received really well, which it largely was. I think there were a few comments when we did launch the final brand around, people having comments that they didn't feel were addressed in the final end result. And I think it's one of those things where we can't appease everyone. Like there will be people that don't like certain things or wanted something changed because they felt a certain way about it, etc. But I think for us, it was a really interesting process in terms of, I think we used it as a way to validate our thinking and tried not to get too hung up on the smaller comments around very specific things. So trying to take a broader lens around, okay, how can we review color and illustration and bring them to the forefront of the brand a little bit more? But what are the elements where through a really strong and compelling story we can communicate the why we made those decisions, so it becomes a little less subjective and more in line with the broader product vision and the brand positioning that we'd set. I think Tim, bless him, creative director at Glassdoor, he was the one responding to a lot of the feedback from the community. It was actually a combination of Tim and Eric for very product specific questions. And, he asked us if we wanted to be a part of that process. And I think we had a conversation about it and we were definitely open to doing it. But I think a part of us didn't want to come in and be the defensive brand agency that was trying to validate why we'd done things a certain way. And so Tim totally respected that, and he was happy to converse and communicate why certain decisions were happening and why they were being made. But we had full visibility. We just didn't engage in that part of the conversation for those reasons, which was hard sometimes because a part of me was like, "Oh, this is why. Like, can't you see this?" And it's just kind of like, okay, just let Tim do it. But it was really interesting to observe from the sidelines, and we were constantly kind of peeking into Fishbowl and seeing what was happening and what the latest comments were. So it was a really fun part of the process. I think, like, at the end of the day, the brands that we're building are there to connect with the community that we're building it for. So that was a really nice way to kind of ensure that what we were building was being reciprocated and it was being understood in the right way as well.
Yeah. And it really signals that Tim is the leader of the work and, is sort of that figurehead. And sometimes I think that's important as well, so that it doesn't seem like it was just completely outsourced to some other group, but he's the one responsible and leading it and responding. And then also the agencies responding back, I think is interesting because it feels like you have an agenda, like if you're featured in Brand New and you get all these comments about like, why'd you do this or whatever. And then if you respond to any of those, no, not good. Like nothing you say is going to feel objective. It's only going to feel defensive. So like, just don't do it. Don't do it.
It's so tempting though, Blake, but we were just like, nah, we just can't. No. We can't.
Yep. When you grow up on a corn farm, you learn fun sayings. And one of those is the juice isn't worth the squeeze. So I'm sure that's not exclusive to Middle Tennessee where I grew up. Yeah. But in this case, the juice is not worth the squeeze.
100%.
So the launch for Glassdoor of the new brand was connected to a new product launch as well. Is that right?
Correct. So externally, the rebrand launch coincided with the new app experience and the new desktop experience. So where Glassdoor had integrated Fishbowl as a part of the product experience.
I love that. So the first time a community member finds out about it could be when the app refreshes or when they go to the Glassdoor website and it was connected directly to something changing in the product.
Exactly. And I think one thing that the team did really well as well was communicate the updates on the Glassdoor blog. So the community, like, in addition to looking at the work that we were co-creating on the sidelines, They were also posting. So when the brand launched, there was a full blog post around all of the different core elements of the system and a really rigorous kind of write up around why this changed. And Christian, the CEO, also made a video that was shared publicly as well around where the product's going, introducing the new features, very much like an Apple new product launch. So it walked everyone through what had changed, why it was changing, and introduced the new brand system as well.
Cool. All right. I think two more questions and we'll be good. What about like key takeaways, or lessons for you from this project? Are there any big picture takeaways that you can think of?
I think, there's always things to be learned on projects and, things that can be sharpened, things that could be done better next time around. I think one of them I touched on earlier, just in terms of ensuring that the key decision makers are being included and brought on board, I think at really pivotal moments within the design process. So, maybe it's not first round creative, but maybe it's the second where things are starting to get tighter and a little bit sharper. And I think we were really lucky in the sense that we were able to get buy-in on the logo and the direction in the end. However, as we know, this isn't always the case and it can impact final delivery and having to start again. So I think having that embedded in the process is something that is, a lesson that's a familiar one, and we try to push as much as possible. And I think the second, which we spoke about, was about the community and more of a validation around the power of collaboration. So at Koto, we're huge advocates for collaboration with our clients, but I think also collaborating with the community and ensuring that we're creating work that's relevant, that's inclusive as well to all members of that community. So having the open design process is something that I think, as I mentioned, we've done before, but I think it's something that I would be really keen to embed as part of our process moving forward to ensure that the work is being received by the people that will ultimately be engaging with the product on a day-to-day basis. So I think just validated that as a really strong way to, to test brand, to ensure that it is connecting with the people that will be engaging with it the most.
Yeah. And I think the open forum or open model design process of getting, audience feedback early and maybe often, I think it's really smart. And I think a lot of it depends on the audience and your client. And are they sophisticated enough to understand the difference in feedback and decision making? Because you get input and you get feedback, and if you ask 100 people, you'll get 100 opinions. And that's not how you make decisions. I think sometimes people get confused with audience testing or feedback to be something that's going to be so directional that it's going to, select a concept, or it's going to be something that is a long litany of things that we need to address to make people feel 100% heard. And I think that's where it gets really difficult. That's where a horse designed by committee is a camel. It's like if you try to. Is that another country saying?
I think so, but I love it. I'm going to take that. I'm always like, design by committee is never a good idea. But I like the camel. It's great.
Yeah.
No, but it's very true. I think to that point, Blake, like we were so fortunate that our core client team were able to see through that and be able to see what was purely subjective and what were kind of points of feedback that we really wanted to fold into where we were taking the brand and ensure that, those community voices were being heard. I think it's like, when you do a round of, the name's just, I've forgotten what I was going to say, actually. Ignore that.
Cut it. It won't exist. It'll be deleted.
I was like, where was I going with that? I just blacked it. So apologies.
So what do you hope the future holds for Glassdoor?
Looking forward, I hope the Glassdoor brand is able to stand the test of time, and that the product, brings the team and the company great success. Really want to ensure that the community continues to thrive, that there is that strong user focus, and that, the platform is able to stand up to, those conversations and being that safe space for those to happen. And I think from a brand perspective, ensuring that, the brand's able to continue to evolve and adapt as the business continues to grow and change as well. So I'm confident that we've built some really solid foundations, and I'm really, really interested to see how that evolves in the future and where that goes in terms of how the product's evolving as well.
I love it. Yeah. I really like how Koto ended the case study, which most people don't even get to the end of a case study, like case study page. But I loved the way you all ended it. It was like thanking the team at Glassdoor and some partners on illustrations and type. And then it was just like, let's keep making work talk real. Like I loved the connection back to that idea. And it's just like a great rally cry,
100% agree. It's a really powerful sentiment, and I hope they continue to keep making it real.
Awesome. All right, Deanna, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your expertise and your courage. Like this type of a process definitely takes confidence and courage to open it up to get lots of community feedback. So thanks for retelling the story. Thanks for sharing it with us and inspiring lots of folks out there to do something maybe similar if they're so brave.
Thank you so much, Blake. And honestly, like I'm open to feedback as well. This is like the first podcast I've done. So things that I could have done better, or I hope that was okay. And I hope you got what you needed from me as well.
Yeah, it was great. I'm going to click stop here and before I click stop, is there anything else that you think we missed or anything else to add?
I think we covered most of your questions, right? I know you wanted to ask a question around feedback and criticism, which I'm happy to answer. Trying to think, we covered that. I think
and I felt like you
most parts.
Okay.
Yeah.
I feel great about it. I think you covered like pretty quickly the idea of just feedback, like everyone has opinions and so I kind of skipped that one because I do feel like, the general feedback was really good. Before these stories, when I prep for them, I will dig to try to find any criticism, only because I just know what it feels like to be not unfairly criticized, but to sort of have like, criticism that's very subjective or whatnot. And I love giving folks a chance to be like, well, to respond in the episode. So that was why I pulled out that one little piece. But I feel like in general, people, especially in the industry, were very much like excited about this direction, this work, and all that you did.
Thanks so much, Blake. Yeah, we were really proud of it. I think at the end of the day, we just want to make work that we're proud of and that responds to a brief and connects with the community. And I think, like you said, everyone has opinions. We're realists in that sense. So we're like, we know everyone's not going to love our work. And I think, we wouldn't be doing our job if everyone did love our work. People have strong emotional reactions to things, and that's okay. Good or bad, it shows that they're passionate about the thing. So
yeah, that's right.